This is Chapter 8. We're in Part 7 of The Manipulated Mind. Patty decided to stay. In a manuscript which she later prepared with the two surviving SLA members, William and Emily Harris, she said that she had gradually started to feel sympathy with the SLA cause. At meals at first she had sat silent in her blindfold, but after a while she started to join in the discussions and began to see the evil of U.S. imperialism. She said that she opened her eyes and realized it was time to get off her ass. Her story in court was different. She claimed she never really believed that she could make the choice to leave. She thought she was being tested and that if she opted for home she would die. After her release from the closet, she made another tape in which she stated that she was now a member of the SLA and was renouncing her old life. A bank robbery plan was started on almost immediately. Patty, now Tanya, was photographed holding a gun and standing in front of the SLA symbol. She was trained for her part in the proposed robbery, and Sank told her that she was to make a speech in the bank. He knew there was a camera there. Patty duly appeared on film and, on another tape, took responsibility for the crime. She didn't, however, make the speech in the bank. She was told, she said, that the FBI would now shoot her on sight. The SLA then moved to Los Angeles, where military training and classes in readiness for the revolution hotted up. In May, two members, William and Emily Harris, were caught in the act of shoplifting from a sports shop. Patty, waiting in a car outside, fired her gun at the building several times to cover their escape. The very next day, all but those three were killed when, during a battle with the police, a building caught fire and burned all those inside. Patty stayed with the Harrises, traveling with them to San Francisco, where she was arrested 16 months later in a flat in which she was living some few miles away from the Harrises. The question in the public mind was, why did she stay with the two lone survivors of the SLA when she had her chance then to escape? Why, in fact, had she acted to save them at the sports shop? Patty said in court that the latter had been an automatic action. She had been trained to respond that way if trouble arose. She also said that the Harrises had planned to keep the SLA alive and wanted her with them. They said they would find and kill her if she escaped. Patty and the Harrises traveled to New York and then Pennsylvania, where they worked on a book about the SLA. Patty's contribution was an interview the Harrises held with her, in which they told her what to say, she claimed, in an autobiographical section which was also edited. During the 16 months when Patty was free, she traveled apart from the Harrises sometimes and actually lived apart from them at the end. Although she said she did that because she was frightened of them. She still considered escape sometimes hopeless because the Harrises would find her. When Patty was captured, she defiantly gave the revolutionary salute. By the time she was brought to trial, her position had changed. She stressed her fear of the SLA, not her sympathy. She explained almost all actions as having been done because she knew she was supposed to do them. She even smiled, she said, because she was supposed to smile, so that she would look more like her media photographs and therefore be the more recognizable. The defense called upon the brainwashing experts, psychiatrists who had studied the repatriated POWs to back up their case that Patty wasn't responsible for her actions. Louis Jolyon West found similarities between the pressures put on Patty and those to which the POWs had been subjected, particularly disorientation, fear, dread, hopelessness. Just as the POWs were led to believe that no one at home cared or wrote, so Patty was imbued with the information that her parents considered her as good as dead and had no further interest in her. Lifton gave the opinion that Patty's compliance was inevitable under the circumstances and that compliance can continue beyond the time of actual coercion. Lifton said that Patty had undergone all the emotional upheaval experienced by the POWs, induced in them by their captors, the helplessness, the identity assault, surfacing of buried guilt, humiliation, self-betrayal through confession, relief as a result of confession, gratitude for a show of leniency which then catapulted the prisoner into an eagerness to comply and a thirst for survival, to which For the first time he can see his way. Both West and Lifton found Patty to be suffering the same kinds of neurotic reactions after her arrest that the POWs experienced on repatriation. Witnesses for the prosecution tried to show that Patty did act of her own free will when she participated in the bank robbery. Psychiatrist Dr. Joel Ford, who had studied many kidnapped victims, drew attention to the fact that Patty had not been a dutiful daughter. She had been independent, rebellious, rejected Roman Catholicism, her family's religion, took drugs and moved in with a man of whom her family was not too fond. He described her as an all-or-nothing sort of person, the very type whom Eric Hoffer has described in The True Believer. She was more similar to than different from the SLA, most of whom had come from standard middle-class backgrounds, and most of them of whom had come to feel dissatisfaction with their lives, just as Patty did. The SLA to Patty offered meaning of life, just as it had come to offer meaning with members. Patty did get convicted by that court, although whether the jury understood, in the fact of conflicting expert evidence, how to decide whether she was brainwashed or not cannot be known. What is interesting to consider, however, is that the evidence from defense and prosecution hardly cancel each other out. They reinforce each other. Whatever the circumstances, Patty did not appear to make decisions that emanated wholly from within. Dissatisfaction and uncertainty about one's own life would seem to be a strong deposing factor for leaving an individual in an all-too-ready state to embrace something new, something that can provide the answer and eliminate uncertainty once and for all. A decision made under such circumstances is no more informed than a decision overtly enforced. The question to ask is what constitutes a truly willed action. Talk has described, see Chapter 3, how the process of socialization, where values inculcated from childhood are enforced by the type of people one meets as a result of holding those values, prevents one from learning to cope with the ambiguities of life. In a world where everything is black or white, where if you are not part of the solution, you are part of the problem, sudden conversion of any kind should be known as a norm, not an oddity. In a previous chapter, it has been discussed how elements such as a need to resolve cognitive dissonance or actions being sufficient to affect attitudes can influence behavior. Patty acted in the bank robbery. She had to square that with her conscience. She was made to speak on tape and write things down, thus participating in her conversion. She apparently made a choice to stay with the SLA, therefore she would have had to resolve the conflict involved, if there were indeed a conflict, by coming to believe in the rightness of that choice. She was a nonconformist type, it was agreed, before her capture. Therefore, having conformed to her captor's view of life, it was perhaps to be expected that she would need to embrace it the more fully to resolve cognitive dissonance. It might therefore be said that everything in Patty's life, from her upbringing and unresolved emotions to the actual events of her kidnap experience, pointed her in the direction that she took. In The Mind Manipulators, Shefflin and Upton reject the brainwashing explanation whenever it is applied. Brainwashing is more than a scare word. It is also a strangely attractive idea. We do not want to confront Pogo's famous insight, "We have met the enemy, and he is us." How much more comforting to think we have met the enemy, and he is Satan, or she is a witch, or his mind is possessed by demonic spirits, or he has been brainwashed by the communists, or by the Moonies, or by the Symbionese Liberation Army. Thus the idea of brainwashing paralyzes thought because it places responsibility somewhere else. But it might equally well paralyze thought to insist on attributing inexplicable action to consciously willed motives. To reject the idea of brainwashing means, in its widest sense, to reject the idea that we are ever out of control of our own actions. For to admit we can be swayed and manipulated is possibly more frightening than to admit that others can choose to perform socially or politically or morally unacceptable actions. And that, my friends, is the end of Chapter 8, and I will see you in the next video of Chapter 9 for The Manipulated Mind by Denise Wynn.